Ariston had always felt that something in his life didn't add up, but for years he couldn't find the right words to explain it. On the surface, everything looked normal: a decent job, a few close friends, relationships that came and went like anyone else's. But underneath all of that, he felt an uncomfortable pattern repeating itself. Situations were different, people were different, yet somehow the emotional outcomes were exactly the same. It was as if his life kept changing costumes but never changed the script. That persistent feeling is what brought him to an old monastery on the side of a mountain. People whispered that a certain teacher lived there, someone who didn't advertise his presence, didn't take students, and didn't participate in any formal religion. Those who met him said he only spoke to people who were truly ready to see things differently. Nobody knew his real name. Most simply called him the teacher. On a quiet afternoon, with the sky covered in a warm, amber haze, Ariston walked through the monastery courtyard for the fourth time. The stones beneath his feet felt cool, and the air carried the smell of pine and distant rain. There, sitting in the same shaded corner as before, the teacher waited, calm, still, almost blending into the ancient surroundings. The teacher raised his head slightly. "You've returned." Ariston nodded. "I need answers. I keep feeling like I'm living the same emotional experiences over and over again. New people, new places, but the same reactions. The same disappointments. The same endings. I don't understand why." The teacher gestured for him to sit. There was no formality, no ritual, just two people in a quiet corner of the world. "What you're noticing," the teacher said, "is the cage." Ariston frowned gently. "Cage?" "Not a physical one," the teacher replied. "A cage made of familiarity. A cage built from repeated emotions, predictable reactions, and patterns you've mistaken for your personality. It's the most effective kind of prison because you don't realize you're inside it." Ariston let the words settle. They stung in a strange, honest way. He thought of arguments that always followed the same arc, dreams that circled back to the same themes, and relationships that collapsed for nearly identical reasons. It was hard to deny the truth in what the teacher was saying. "So I'm stuck in a loop?" Ariston asked quietly. The teacher nodded. "A loop designed to keep you repeating what feels familiar. It gives you the same lessons, the same emotional wounds, the same types of people, so you'll react in the same ways as before." "Designed by who?" Ariston asked. "Or by what?" The teacher's expression shifted to something soft but serious. "There are forces in this world, call them wardens, shadows, parasites, whatever name you prefer, that cannot produce their own light. They survive by feeding on predictable emotional energy. When humans repeat their wounds, these forces are nourished." Ariston looked down at his hands, thinking of the many nights he stayed awake replaying old pain. He assumed it was simply trauma, or overthinking, or just part of being human. The idea that something benefited from him staying stuck was unsettling. "So trauma isn't just trauma?" he asked. "It becomes part of the loop?" "Trauma is where the script gets written," the teacher said. "When something painful happens, especially early in life, the nervous system builds a pattern around it. Then the system, the cage, brings triggers back to you again. Not because you deserved pain, but because repetition feeds the structure that keeps you small." Ariston felt a slow clarity rise inside him. He had always known his reactions were automatic, but he'd never considered they were predictable by design. "Then why do some people never question anything?" he asked. "Why do they go through life without ever feeling this loop?" "Because not all souls are wired the same," the teacher answered. "Some souls come into this world with a spark that refuses to die out. They sense when a pattern doesn't belong to them. They notice repetition. They see the cracks in the illusion. These are the ones who eventually stop playing the assigned role." Ariston exhaled slowly. "So those people are the chosen ones?" The teacher chuckled lightly. "Not chosen. Just awake earlier than expected. The courtyard grew quiet again. A faint breeze passed through the old stone walls, making the vines tremble. The teacher leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something. When you look back at your life, your relationships, your failures, your dreams, do you see a straight line, or do you see a circle? Ariston closed his eyes. Memories surfaced instantly. Conflicts that repeated themselves with different faces. Promises he made to himself but never managed to keep. A familiar loneliness that returned no matter who he was with. Even his successes seemed temporary, as if they had to collapse eventually to keep him in the same emotional state. A circle, he whispered. Good, the teacher said. Seeing the loop is the first crack in the cage. Most people never see it because everything appears different on the outside. They don't recognize the interior pattern. Ariston felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from a sense of recognition. Something inside him was waking up, something that had been dormant for a long time. So what happens now? He asked. Now, the teacher said, you start learning how the cage was built. You begin to see which reactions were never truly yours. And once you see the architecture, the loop loses power. Ariston looked around the courtyard, noticing the subtle warmth in the air, the stillness of the monastery, the weight of the moment. He sensed that his life had just changed direction, even though nothing physical had happened. If I step out of the cage, he asked, what happens next? The teacher smiled gently, a smile both reassuring and mysterious. Then life stops repeating. The wardens lose their grip. And you begin to walk a path that is actually yours. But freedom only comes to those willing to see how they've been held back. Ariston breathed in deeply. For the first time in years, he felt a clear, steady sense of movement inside his own mind. He didn't know what the next step looked like, but he finally understood why he'd been stuck, and why he had been drawn to this place, to this teacher, to this moment. He was ready to continue. Ariston returned to the monastery the next day with a different kind of energy, an alertness he hadn't felt in years. Now that the idea of a loop had been planted in his mind, he couldn't stop noticing it. Every memory he revisited carried the same underlying rhythm. Even the small things, like why certain comments hurt him more than they should, or why he always avoided particular opportunities, seemed to trace back to something older than the moments themselves. The teacher sat under the same quiet archway, as though he had been expecting him. You see more today, the teacher said. Ariston nodded. It's like the patterns in my life are suddenly visible. I can't unsee them. That is how the second layer of the cage works, the teacher replied. Once you recognize the loop, the next question becomes, what inside you keeps agreeing to it? Ariston sat down, leaning his elbows on his knees. I've been thinking about that. I keep remembering things from childhood. Things I haven't thought about in years. Good, the teacher said. That's exactly where the algorithm begins. Ariston raised an eyebrow. Algorithm? Yes, the teacher answered calmly. Your emotional patterns were programmed early. Not by technology, by experience. By wounds. By moments that your young mind couldn't understand, so it copied what it felt as a survival strategy. Once those strategies are set, the system simply replays situations that trigger them. Ariston looked down, absorbing the idea. So you're saying my adult problems are just recycled childhood pain? Not the pain itself, the teacher corrected softly. The responses you formed to survive it. A silence settled between them. The wind rustled through the branches overhead. Tell me something specific, the teacher continued. Choose one repeating pattern from your life. Ariston thought for a moment. I always expect people to leave, he said. Even when they haven't done anything. I act distant, and eventually, they really do leave. The teacher nodded gently. And where did you learn that pattern? Ariston swallowed. My mother left when I was young. She didn't mean to hurt me. She just couldn't stay there, the teacher said quietly. That is the moment the script was written. A child learns, love will disappear. And so the nervous system builds a strategy: stay guarded, stay distant, leave before being left. Ariston felt the familiar heaviness, but, somehow, it was easier to breathe through it. So all this time, he said, I wasn't choosing to be distant. It was just programmed. Yes, the teacher replied. And this is how the wardens take advantage. They don't create the pattern. They simply recycle it. They bring you partners who activate the same fear. They repeat the same story until you believe the story is you. Ariston leaned back against the stone wall behind him. What about other patterns? Money struggles? Feeling stuck? Certain types of people showing up again and again? All of it, the teacher said. Every emotional loop in your life ties back to a core wound. And the system amplifies that wound to keep your energy predictable. Predictable, Ariston murmured. So it can be harvested. Yes, the teacher replied, because your reactions are the fuel. A long pause followed. Ariston finally asked, but what about people who seem to stay asleep? People who never question anything, who don't see any of this. The cage rewards them, the teacher said. It gives them comfort, routine, validation. If they never challenge the script, the system doesn't need to disrupt their lives. So sensitives, the ones who feel too deeply, are the ones who suffer the most? Yes, the teacher answered, because they outgrow the script earlier than others. They feel the false patterns sooner. They sense when something is off. They can't stay asleep, even if they want to. They are the ones who notice the loop, and that makes them dangerous to the system. Ariston exhaled slowly. So, people like me. The teacher smiled, not with pride but with compassion. You are starting to wake up. That alone shifts the energy inside you. The system has to work harder to pull you back into the loop. Ariston rubbed his forehead. That explains why things have felt more intense lately. Old triggers coming back stronger, almost like the loop was tightening. It was, the teacher said. Whenever someone gets close to breaking free, the system throws familiar obstacles at them. Old temptations, old conflicts, old versions of themselves. It tries to pull them back into predictable patterns. Ariston stared at the ground. So my life wasn't falling apart, it was trying to keep me the same. Yes, the teacher replied. Because once you act differently than the script expects, the loop begins to break. And the system loses its grip. A breeze passed between them, carrying the scent of cedar and mountain air. Tell me, the teacher continued, who in your life triggers the loop the most? Ariston hesitated. Someone I cared about. Everything between us felt familiar, like we had lived it before. And it ended the same way all my relationships end. That person wasn't the cause, the teacher said. They were the activation. They touched the wound that still believes love equals abandonment. Ariston nodded slowly, understanding, forming piece by piece. So the loop isn't outside me. It's inside. Exactly, the teacher said. The system only needs one thing from you, that you keep reacting the same way. Ariston closed his eyes. So if I react differently, the loop collapses? The teacher smiled. That is the doorway to freedom. But before you can walk through it, you must know the full architecture of your pattern, what triggers it, what fear lies beneath, and how you have been conditioned to act. Ariston took a deep breath. And then? Then, the teacher said, you take one action that goes against the old script. Just one. And everything begins to shift. Ariston opened his eyes, feeling something inside him rearranging, an awareness he hadn't had before. The words were simple, but they landed in a place much deeper than his mind. So this is just the beginning, he said. Yes, the teacher replied. The loop is made of repetition. Break the repetition, and you break the cage. Ariston stared at the fading light over the mountains, feeling a steady pulse of clarity move through him. He wasn't out of the loop yet, but now he could see the machinery behind it. And something in him, something that had been quiet for years, finally stirred with the courage to push back. Ariston arrived at the monastery before sunrise this time. The sky was still blue-gray, and a gentle chill sat in the air. He felt different, not free, but awake in a way that made ordinary thoughts feel less heavy. The teacher was standing near the edge of the courtyard, watching the horizon without urgency, as if he had all the time in the world. "You're ready for the next part," the teacher said without turning around. Ariston stepped beside him. "I can see the loop now. I can trace it back to where it started. But what do I actually do with that? How do I get out?" The teacher finally looked at him. "You break the pattern. Not with force, not with anger, not with a dramatic decision. You break it by doing what the script never expects." Ariston frowned thoughtfully. "And what does the script expect?" "Predictability," the teacher said. "It expects you to stay small, to stay afraid, to stay wounded. It expects you to repeat the same reaction you've always had. That is how the cage stays intact." He paused, then continued gently. "There are 3 moves that weaken the system. They are simple, but they must be done with intention." Ariston nodded, listening closely. "The first," the teacher said, "is naming your core pattern out loud. Not in your mind, your voice must claim it. Because when something is spoken, it loses its place in the shadows." Ariston hesitated. "You want me to say it?" "Yes." Ariston took a slow breath. "My pattern is abandonment. I expect people to leave, so I push them away first." The words felt heavier than he expected, as if releasing them pulled something out from deep inside. The teacher nodded with approval. "Good. When you speak the pattern, the system can no longer use it with the same strength. It becomes exposed." "What's the second move?" Ariston asked. The teacher turned to face him directly. "You must take one action that goes against the script. Just one. Something small but genuine. Something the old version of you would never do." "Like what?" Ariston asked. "For someone whose loop is abandonment," the teacher said, "the script expects distance, silence, avoidance, or self-protection. The opposite might be opening a conversation. Telling someone the truth instead of shutting down. Staying present when you want to run." Ariston winced slightly. It sounded simple, but he knew how deeply that pattern ran. "It doesn't matter if the outcome is perfect," the teacher added. "The change isn't about them. It's about proving to your nervous system that a new reaction is possible. One new move introduces instability into the loop. The system can no longer rely on your predictability." Ariston nodded slowly. He could feel the truth in it, almost physically, like a shift in the air around him. "And the third move?" he asked. The teacher's voice softened. "Declare your spiritual sovereignty." Ariston blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," the teacher said, "you speak an intention that no force, seen or unseen, can override your will. The wardens feed on unclaimed inner territory. They survive in the places where you feel powerless. Declaring sovereignty means claiming that territory back." "That sounds intense," Ariston admitted. "It is," the teacher said. "But it doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be true." He placed a hand over his own chest, demonstrating. "You can say something as simple as, 'I choose what happens in my inner world. Nothing else decides for me.'" Ariston repeated the words quietly, and something subtle, but undeniable, shifted. It felt like a door closing somewhere behind him. The teacher nodded approvingly. "Now the system has a problem. Its hold depends on unconscious agreement. You've withdrawn that agreement. A long silence followed. The sun began to rise, layering soft gold across the mountains. Ariston felt the world around him differently, sharper but lighter. But what happens after this? He asked. Does everything change instantly? Do the patterns just disappear? The teacher shook his head gently. No. At first, things become more obvious, not easier. Triggers may show up one last time. Old fears may try to pull you back. Not because the loop is strengthening, but because it is collapsing. Ariston thought of all the times in his life when things got worse right before they shifted. Maybe those moments weren't chaos, maybe they were transition. So what should I expect? He asked. Signs, the teacher said simply. Very small at first. A conversation that feels lighter. A reaction you normally would have had but didn't. Someone showing you kindness that you usually overlook. A familiar conflict that suddenly loses its power. He paused. These are signs that reality is rearranging itself around your new choices. Ariston took that in with a steady breath. So I'll know I'm breaking the loop because life will stop repeating. Yes, the teacher said. And once you break the loop, the wardens lose their grip. They cannot harvest unpredictability. They cannot feed on freedom. Ariston lowered his gaze. But what if I fail? What if I fall back into the old reaction? The teacher smiled softly. Then you simply choose again. Awakening is not a straight path. It's a practice. Every time you respond differently, you weaken the old pattern further. A breeze passed through the courtyard, gentle and cool. Remember, the teacher said, you are not fighting the loop. You are outgrowing it. And nothing in this universe can stop a soul that is outgrowing its cage. Ariston felt something warm expand in his chest, not excitement, but a quiet confidence he had never felt before. A sense that maybe, just maybe, he could actually step into a different life. He looked at the teacher. So this is how the system collapses. One small choice at a time? The teacher nodded. Yes. Not with explosions. Not with miracles. With consciousness. With ownership. With the moment you choose who you are instead of who the script tells you to be. Ariston closed his eyes briefly, letting the morning light warm his face. He felt the possibility of freedom not as a concept, but as something real, something that lived inside him now. When he opened his eyes again, the teacher was watching him with a calm certainty. You're ready, the teacher said. Ariston didn't argue. He didn't doubt it. For the first time in his life, he felt aligned with himself, like he could step forward without dragging the past behind him. And as he walked away from the courtyard, he sensed that the world around him was quietly rearranging, preparing to meet the new version of him that had finally begun to emerge. As Ariston steps beyond the walls of the old monastery, something fundamental has shifted, not just around him, but within him. And in many ways, that's the quiet truth behind every spiritual awakening. The world doesn't dramatically explode into light, instead, the changes begin softly, almost invisibly, inside the patterns we no longer agree to repeat. Freedom starts the moment we stop reacting the way the old script expects. The loops that once felt inevitable begin to loosen. The beliefs that once held us in place start to crumble. And the parts of ourselves we thought were permanent, fear, doubt, old wounds, slowly reveal themselves as temporary stories we inherited rather than chose. Ariston's journey is a reminder that awakening isn't about perfection. It isn't about becoming untouchable or transcending life. It's about reclaiming the pieces of ourselves that were quietly taken by repetition, by pain, and by forces that counted on us never noticing. When you name your patterns out loud, when you take one small action against the old script, when you claim sovereignty over your inner world, something remarkable happens. The entire system begins to collapse around your newfound clarity. And step by step, you become the author of a life that finally belongs to you. If this story sparked something in you, if it made you feel seen, understood, or a little more awake, then I invite you to stay connected. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any upcoming explorations into awakening, symbolism, and the hidden architecture of consciousness. And if you felt even one moment of recognition in Ariston's journey, go ahead and drop a like. It tells the algorithm that this kind of content matters. Finally, if you know someone who might need to hear this, share this video with them. You never know whose loop might be ready to break.